Series, Scary Sunday, number 1. Status, draft. February 1959. A tent is discovered in the Ural Mountains. It lies empty, abandoned, its fabric torn open from the inside. The ground around it is covered in snow. 9 people entered this region. 9 people were supposed to exit together 2 weeks later. Only the tent came back. The search team finds something worse than bodies. They find the tent itself, the way it was abandoned, the way something made 9 experienced hikers flee into the darkness without their shoes, without their coats, into temperatures that would kill within an hour. Something forced them out of that tent. Something they were more afraid of than freezing to death. What happened on the night of February 1st, 1959, in Dyatlov Pass has never been adequately explained. Not by the Soviet government, not by modern investigators, not by anyone. The case sits in that strange space between accident, tragedy, and something that defies conventional understanding. Here's what we know. In January 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers assembled for an expedition in the Ural Mountains. They were students and workers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, all skilled mountaineers. Their leader was Igor Dyatlov, a 23-year-old who had organized similar expeditions before. The plan was straightforward. Hike into one of the most remote regions of the Soviet Union, spend time in the wilderness, and return with stories and photographs. They were well equipped. They knew what they were doing. They weren't reckless. Dyatlov had experience. The group had prepared carefully. They carried tents, sleeping bags, warm clothes, food for the journey. They told the institute when they would return, January 29th. That was the last date anyone expected them back. By February 2nd, when the group hadn't returned, the institute became concerned. By February 3rd, they were certain something had gone wrong. A search operation began. And what the search teams found in those mountains became one of the strangest disasters in modern history. But here's what no one can explain. The bodies didn't match the story the tent was telling. The group was found on February 26th and the following days. The first body found was Igor Dyatlov himself, lying in the snow about 5 kilometers south of the tent. He was partially buried by snow, facing the direction of the tent, as if he'd been trying to get back. Cause of death was ruled as hypothermia, but the question remained. Why did he leave the tent in the first place? The tent, when found, was undamaged from the outside. There were no predators, no bears in the region at that time of year. The tent wasn't torn or destroyed by weather. The tears in the fabric, they were made from the inside. Someone had cut their way out. From inside the tent, 9 people decided they needed to leave. And they did so urgently enough to cut through fabric to do it. The state of the campsite told a story that made no sense. The fire had been extinguished. The stove that should have been heating the tent was cold. Equipment was scattered. Clothing was arranged in patterns as if they'd been taken off deliberately. The sleeping bags were partially unzipped. The investigation concluded that the hikers had fled from something and died of exposure. But that raised a question that still hasn't been answered. 9 people don't run barefoot into a blizzard because of hypothermia creeping in. They run because something else frightened them more than death. The second body found was Yuri Doroshenko, lying 180 meters from the tent in the snow. He was wearing only his underwear. The third was another young man named Georgy Krivonishenko, also nearly naked. His arms were outstretched. The subsequent bodies were found at varying distances from the tent, all in states of severe underdress for the deadly cold. This is the crucial detail. Hypothermia victims in its final stages sometimes experience what's called paradoxical undressing. As their core temperature drops, their brains become confused. The victim feels hot rather than cold. They shed their clothing. This is a documented phenomenon. But here's what made investigators uncomfortable. Not all 9 bodies showed this symptom. Some were partially clothed. Some had made attempts to cover themselves. And the arrangement of the bodies, the patterns, suggested something more organized than panicked flight. One of the bodies, a man named Semyon Zolotaryov, was found with a fractured skull. The fracture was severe, but there was no corresponding wound on the outside of his head. The pathologist noted that the injury was consistent with the kind of blow that would have required considerable force. He had been hit, but there was no weapon found, no evidence of a struggle at the campsite. Another body, Nikolai Thibault Brignol, had been found wearing Doroshenko's sweater. His chest was crushed as if he'd been pressed by something heavy. The autopsy noted that he had several broken ribs. This is not a symptom that fits with hypothermia. This is the result of trauma. The investigation continued. A third body was found with tissue missing from her face and eyes. Cause of death, the official report stated, was hypothermia, but the condition of her remains suggested something had been feeding, not predators, something smaller, something that had access to her while she lay dying in the snow. By the time all the bodies were recovered, the death toll was final. 9 hikers, all dead. All found in a perimeter extending down the slope toward a cedar grove. All dead of exposure, according to the official investigation. But the evidence contradicted that conclusion at nearly every turn. The Soviet government sealed most of the investigative files. Some documents were declassified in the 1990s, but significant portions of the autopsy reports and investigative notes remain classified to this day. The initial investigation was closed in 1959 with a ruling of natural causes due to the force of nature. A supernatural force of nature, the officials noted, but nature nonetheless. But here's what no one can explain. On the night of February 1st, something happened in that tent that was bad enough to drive 9 experienced mountaineers from the only shelter they had in one of the most lethal environments on Earth. Over the decades, investigators and researchers have proposed various theories. The first and most common explanation is avalanche. The theory goes that an avalanche struck the camp in the night. The hikers heard the sound, thought the mountain was collapsing, and fled in panic. The avalanche didn't directly kill them, but their panic and flight into the cold did. The problem with this theory is fundamental. The investigation found no avalanche evidence. The slopes around the campsite were gentle. An avalanche in that region is possible, but it would have left marks on the terrain. The snow patterns around the tent showed no evidence of major snow movement, and the hikers were experienced. They would have recognized avalanche risk before setting up camp. Another theory focuses on military activity. The Ural Mountains, during the Cold War, had secret military installations. Perhaps the hikers stumbled onto a classified Soviet test. Perhaps they saw something they shouldn't have seen. Perhaps the Soviet military was conducting an experiment, and the hikers were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This theory gained traction because of the government's rapid sealing of records and their unusual level of secrecy around the case. The investigation was closed almost immediately. The records were locked away. The explanations were vague. Why would the Soviet government react so strongly to a simple mountaineering accident unless they had something to hide? The classified theory suggests that either the military was conducting tests in the region and something went wrong, or the government was simply protecting itself from the political consequences of 9 dead hikers on a region they claimed was safe. A third theory, less scientific but persistent in the communities that study this case, is that the hikers encountered something in the wilderness that forced them to flee. This could be interpreted as a large animal. There were rumors of large predators in the region, though no bears were expected to be active in February. But folklore in the region had long spoken of strange creatures, large bipedal animals, unusual sounds in the night. The theory suggests that something, whether rational animal or something else, was present at the campsite on the night of February 1st. Something dangerous enough to drive 9 people into a blizzard. The most uncomfortable theory focuses on the internal evidence, the fractures, the internal injuries, the missing tissue. These details suggest that some kind of violence occurred, either during the initial panic or at some point afterward. If the hikers fled the tent, and if some of them made it to the cedar grove where several bodies were eventually found, there's a question about what happened in that grove. Were there only 9 people in those mountains? Some investigators have speculated that there could have been others, locals perhaps, military personnel possibly, people who encountered the hikers and events escalated. The archive goes deeper, and the deeper you dig, the more the contradictions mount. The more the official story fails to explain what the evidence shows. The bodies tell one story, the tent tells another, the terrain tells a third. And they don't align. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old. He was skilled and experienced. He was returning to the mountains he loved. He and 8 other people went into those mountains expecting to come out. They didn't. 50 years later, a retired Soviet general claimed that the deaths had been caused by a secret military experiment gone wrong. The general refused to provide specifics before his death, but the claims surfaced and disappeared, just the same way the truth about Dyatlov Pass seems to surface and disappear. In 2019, new investigations were announced. DNA testing was performed. Analysis was renewed. And once again, after a brief period of scrutiny, the case settled back into mystery. The bodies were re-examined, but the fundamental question remained unanswered. What frightened 9 people enough to drive them from their only shelter into certain death? Some stories were never meant to be found. Some questions don't have answers. Some nights in the mountains hold on to their secrets. And Dyatlov Pass, even now, even with modern technology and modern investigation, keeps its silence. The hikers are gone. The mountain remains. And the tent, torn open from the inside, stands as the only witness to what transpired on that terrible night in February 1959, and it will never tell.